No intro today. Just enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Izuku would run his way towards the direction of the stage with one thing on his mind. Crap. I can't believe I did that again. He stands there, he looks at Todoroki, Todoroki looks back at him. He's looking all serious, like, can't wait to fight Midoriya. He's excited, his blood is pumping. He's wanting to show the world that he can beat him. And Deku was pretty much just standing there preoccupied with what he just did to Uraraka and how she's gonna perceive him, saying that she's probably gonna think he's a perv or a creep now. And Izuku was just like, I did it again. Well, I guess I gotta deal with the consequences when I see her again. And Midnight would just go, get started! Immediately, all of them would begin to watch attentively, and by all of them, I mean the crowd, right? As Todoroki goes, bam! He slams his foot on the ground, and the ice glacier just, it shoots at Deku's direction, right? I know you guys don't need sound effects, but I'm just in a good mood. But anyways, so basically Todoroki shoots the gigantic ice glacier, right? Now, Deku sees this thing coming at him, and Izuku pretty much just grabs his, oh wait, he doesn't have a sword. He pretty much goes on to just punch, just bam, shatter the iceberg, and pretty much walk towards the direction of Todoroki slowly. Todoroki can hear the ice glacier slowly being broken, and Deku is just punching straight through it, just shattering the ice, getting it out of his way, as Todoroki is just questioning how Izuku is doing that. Izuku from here gets in front of Todoroki, and Todoroki would try to shoot another beam of ice just to get Deku back. But Deku appears in front of his face, grabs him by the collar of his shirt and says, "Why would you do that? As if I can't reach you in an instant." And suddenly, Todoroki looks back at Izuku and is like, "What?" And Deku just bam, headbutt straight to the head of Todoroki. And let me just say it this way. Todoroki gets knocked out. This dude he's gone. He's done. He's on the ground. He's out cold and he's not getting back up. I'm sorry. It's not happening. But yeah, Todoroki gets knocked out. And that's the end of that story. So we then jump over to the next battle, which is pretty much Deku versus Bakugo. However, before that, Deku would go visit Uraraka in the infirmary, where he catches a glimpse of her, well, crying, right? She's tearing up because of the fact that she didn't win the sports festival, and she feels like she disappointed her parents. After she gets off the phone, Izuku sits down and says, "I wanted to apologize again, but then I saw that you felt bad." And he just sits down next to her and he's like, "What's wrong?" Uraraka looks back at him and, she begins tearing up, crying into Deku's arms. Deku wipes the tears out of her face. He turns his Riz mode on. He was all like, "Oh yeah, I got her vulnerable," right? I'm just playing. But seriously though, Izuku basically goes on to pretty much talk to her a little bit and tell her that everything will be fine. Then they have a little bit of a moment where they just look at each other and Deku gives her the biggest smile. And Uraraka is just comes in for a hug. And Deku he sits there, he just accepts the hug. Following this, he looks at Uraraka and tells her that he's gonna do his best in his next match to promise to pretty much get revenge for her. And Uraraka says she knows he will. As Deku goes out towards the direction of the stadium and pretty much begins to essentially put on a show. The second that Bakugo shoots an explosion towards the direction of Deku, Deku would just go full counter and say, "Can you not learn, Bakugo?" Now you guys might be wondering, how is he able to say full counter if he doesn't have a tool in it? Let's just say he grabs a piece of debris from one of the explosions and just waves it in the air. He's like, full counter, right? So that happens, and Bakugo then gets angry. He's like, how could you do that? I forgot, right? He then lunges back again and powers up a gigantic explosion, except it's not intended to actually hit Deku. He hits it towards the ground so that it could create a smoke screen. And he then lunges into the direction of Deku, throwing punches, kicks, and all that stuff, right? Now, Deku is pretty much tanking this attack. It's hurting him a bit, right? But he's tanking it. And Bakugo eventually gets so close that he shoots an explosion right at Deku's face. Deku would just smirk underneath the rubble and smoke and say, "Revenge counter!" as all of the damage that Bakugo just inflicted onto Deku just gets sent back twice as hard at Bakugo. And Bakugo is just, he's exploded to the side of the arena. He leaves a crater the size of his body there, and Bakugo is just sitting there wondering how he got to this situation, regretting all of his life decisions that led him to that moment. But following this, Izuku is awarded with the first place medal, Bakugo second, Todoroki third, and that's just how the cookie crumbled. But regardless of said fact, actually no, it would be Tokiyami third, sorry about that. But regardless of how the cookie crumbles, once Izuku pops up with his medal, Uraraka is all like, "You did it, Izuku, like that's pretty great." Izuku looks at Uraraka and he's like, "Yeah, it is pretty great, right?" And they laugh, Ida comes in, and he's like, "Congratulations, Izuku." Immediately, Deku could feel some strange energy in Ida, and he begins to wonder what's up with him. He immediately asks him, and Ida just waves him off. He's like, "Don't worry about it, Izuku. Like, it's nothing crazy," right? Following this, the next day, they find themselves back at school, and all of them are pretty much talking about their performances. Uraraka seems to be fine after the incident, and Deku, as well as everybody else, are told to essentially pick their hero names, as well as, the internship that they want to go to. Obviously, Izuku's going to be interning with Aizawa, so he's going to be doing more or less learning how to run a hero agency. He's going to be learning how to apprehend villains, how to jump in when the situation is needed, and how to analyze a crime scene, right? That's pretty much what Deku's going to be doing during his time with Aizawa. When it comes to his pro hero name, his name is going to be Dragon Sin Meliodas. That's going to be his name. You could call him Meliodas for short, but that's going to be the name that Izuku chose to go with. Everybody's like, "That's actually a pretty interesting name," and Deku's like, "Thanks." Suddenly, everybody begins to pretty much pack their stuff, and about 3 days later, they all find themselves at their respective interns. Deku sending a text to Uraraka, and Aizawa just peeps over Deku's shoulder, and he's like, "You have been getting pretty close to that girl. When are you going to finally tie the knot? I mean, I know you already have been up to some malicious activities recently, Izuku." And Deku just, he's like, don't say that. Like, it's not even like that." Aizawa's like, "It is, Deku." And from here, Deku's like, "Why'd you call me that?" And Aizawa's like, "I don't know. I heard them calling you that, and it sounds pretty fun." Deku goes, "It literally means can't do anything." And Aizawa's like, "Exactly, Deku." As Deku gets a little irritated, but he's like, whatever. And suddenly the internship process begins. Deku would pretty much go out at nighttime, monitor the streets, and would pretty much help Aizawa pretty much take down any and all villains that they came across. It would be a pretty smooth week for Deku, but Ida's not gonna have a sweet week. I'm telling y'all boys, Ida is done being a hero because first of all, there is no Nomu attack, right? So wait, there's no Nomu attack. So Manuel doesn't have to just let Ida run off. He's actually able to chase after him and stop Ida from rushing at the hero killer Stain. I'm going to be saying that instead Ida and Manuel are there, and Manuel, when he sees the hero native on the ground, he tells Ida to grab native and get out of here as fast as possible. That the first priority on their list should be saving him, and that their own survival, and that his survival doesn't matter, that he's under his care, and that he's making sure he goes back to see another day. Ida looks at him and he's like, "No, I won't do that." And Manuel punches him straight in the face and says, "Do you think your brother would have wanted you to die?" And Ida, he finally snaps back and he runs away, and Manuel loses his life to the hero killer. The hero killer tells him that it was a valiant effort, but he will die. And so Manuel dies. Tragic. It should have been Ida, but it is what it is. And basically, Ida goes back to school knowing that it was his fault that a pro hero died. So he pretty much ends up resigning as a pro hero. I feel like Ida would do something like that where he's like, "It was my fault that somebody died. Like, I have to give up." And then the entire class would be like, "No, Ida, it wasn't your fault," right? Something like that. It just feels like such an Ida thing to do. Like, I'm pretty sure you guys know what I mean, right? But regardless of said fact, they all return back to school, and Ida and Deku and Uraraka hang out. And Ida can kind of sense those strange energy between Uraraka and Deku going around, and he's like, "I'm gonna go ahead and go hang out with them." He goes and hang out somewhere else, and Uraraka and Deku hang out, right? They talk a little bit. and they begin to get a little bit more than just friends connection. They're flirting around a little bit, but they're not like kissing or like hugging, like straight away. They just hang out a bit more than usual, right? Eventually, all of them would be told about the final exams, and all of them would end up studying for them. Uraraka and Izuku would, they would study together, and everybody else would do their own things, right? Deku pretty much ends up helping Uraraka with their confidence boost, and eventually the final exam would come where Deku has to face off against All Might. Now, obviously, All Might can't light a candle to Izuku. I mean, we saw what Deku did to the Nomu, so it's not gonna happen. So All Might immediately tries to fight Izuku. Bakugo's on Deku's team. Bakugo's like, oh, don't get in my way, Deku, right? But Deku just uses his, he splits himself into multiple parts, and all of them rush towards All Might except for the real one that would simply lunge towards the exit, not wanting to hurt All Might too bad. And that's pretty much how they pass. Bakugo gets angry. He's like, how could you do that, Deku? I wanted to fight All Might at his best. And you stopped that. He grabs him by the collar, and Deku looks at him with his demonic eyes popping. He's like, unless you want to go home in an arm brace and an entire full body cast, I would recommend you let me go. All Might gets behind them, and he's like, young Bakugo, I would let him go. And Bakugo turns around angry and shoots an explosion at All Might. All Might grabs his arm and then pretty much just with an angry expression on his face says, come with me. And pretty much Bakugo gets a failing score just because of what he just did to All Might, so good riddance. And he also gets suspended from UA for the entire forest training camp thing, just because you don't do that to a teacher, right? But essentially they go to the forest training camp and nothing happens. I know you guys were probably expecting for me to say that during the forest training camp the villains attack, but because Shigaraki isn't there, he's not exactly there to launch the full-scale attack. Not only that, but how do I put this? The main villain, which is All For One, is kind of scared of Meliodas, aka Deku, so he's not exactly going to be rushing there and having a spasm over trying to go get Deku or All Might. He just leaves them be. And so the clash just progresses like normal. More time for Izuku and Uraraka to get along. And obviously they would end up having their good moments here and there where they just find each other, when they're coming out of the hot springs. Deku looks at Uraraka and he's all like, oh, you look good. And Uraraka's like, thanks, you too. She walks away and the girls of UA are like, tee, you know how girls are, you know what I'm saying? But basically they start teasing Uraraka. And everybody's like, you guys should just seal the knot. I mean, it's been obvious he's liked you since you know what he did. Uraraka's face goes red and she's like, yeah, I kind of miss it. And she immediately covers her mouth and everybody's like, ooh, we caught you in a 4K. Suyu takes a picture and Uraraka just begins floating in the air, right? But Deku is back with the boys and he's just sitting there and they're talking to him about how he rizzed up Uraraka. And they're like, I am kind of jealous, Kaminari would say. As Deku just begins talking and he's like, yeah, she does look pretty good. From here, they go back to school because nothing happens. Provisional license exam, yada, yada, yada. That's boring. I'm going to skip it. And we now find ourselves in the middle of the, what arc comes after this? Like, it's the overhaul arc, right? The overhaul arc. Something I completely forgot to mention was the fact that, All For One did lose his minion, so now he needs somebody else to work with. Who do you think he's gonna work with? Yeah, Overhaul. It just makes sense. I mean, when I was writing the story, I wasn't thinking of doing that, but as the thing progressed, I realized, hey, Overhaul, All For One, imagine if both of them worked together. That would be pretty lethal. So All For One would begin to pretty much work alongside him, and so both of them would begin creating that, quirk destruction thing, right? They would end up, of course, actually creating it, and what would basically end up happening is Mirio would end up fighting the classroom just like in the original. Now, I'm gonna spare you guys the details just because Izuku does inevitably end up defeating Mirio, and Mirio does, of course, offer him, a little internship opportunity with Izuku, right? So pretty much what ends up happening is Izuku goes over to, the little opportunity, and he would actually, this time around when Mirio bumps into Overhaul, what would end up happening is pretty much Deku goes on to essentially say that he got to go use it. So Mirio would wait for him outside that alleyway and Eri would bump into him. She would be scared and Overhaul would come in, he would take her back, and when Deku's done, Mirio would tell him all about it, and Deku would immediately grab Mirio and tell him why didn't he help that girl, as Mirio's like, I can't risk the operation. And Deku punches Mirio in the face and he's like, you let that little girl continue to get tortured when you could have saved her. You're no hero. He begins rushing into that alleyway looking for Overhaul, but he was gone. And he would end up going back to the Night Eye Agency, only to find out that all the heroes would be called for a full-scale attack on the overall household. They would do so, and eventually Deku and Mirio would be the first ones to arrive there. And when Mirio's fighting against Overhaul, it goes pretty even until All For One comes in and just begins going, great job. He then shoots tendrils at the direction of Mirio, which Deku gets in the way and just shatters. He just bam, he cuts it and cuts those tendrils, right? All For One would see Deku and he would say, so you're that kid who's been causing me problems. He immediately would begin to shoot an air-powered blast at the direction of Deku, and Deku would not even be sent back flying. He's literally standing there, his hair would just begin flowing in the wind, and Deku would say, I am. Suddenly, Overhaul would say, I knew those attacks would have no impact on you, so I'm using this. And he shoots him with a quirky erasure bullet, right? Mirio tries to get in the way to dodge it. He's like, no, but Deku just hits Mirio out of the way and he's like, it won't do anything. It hits him and Izuku just looks towards the direction of All For One as he's like, was that supposed to tickle? His eyes return to his demonic state as he blitzes Overhaul and grabs him by the head and just bam, slams him into the wall. He then grabs Overhaul by his leg and pretty much begins to ragdoll him, throws him up into the air and goes, 1,000 divine slashes, and just cuts Overhaul into thousands of little pieces, right? Suddenly he looks back at Overhaul and says, and you have it even worse. You did horrible things to that little girl, and I'm gonna make sure that you know what it feels like. Overhaul waves his hand into the air and is trying to overhaul Deku, but Deku would simply say, full counter! And the attack would overhaul, right? And he just begins to pretty much disintegrate in the ground. He dies. GG, that's the end of the story. Psych! I lied. After this small event happens, what pretty much ends up going down is Deku would finally have to face the final boss, asking Uraraka out. He would do so, and obviously Deku and Uraraka would end up kind of going out on their first date, you know what I'm saying? And eventually a couple of months would pass and Deku and Uraraka would, they would begin studying, if you know what I mean, hitting the books, absolutely beginning to get to know each other and connecting on a more spiritual level, if you get what I'm saying. I knew you guys were waiting for that. I literally knew it, so I couldn't leave you guys without it, because I know some of you weirdos, y'all wanted it, but it is what it is. But yeah, boys, that's pretty much going to be the conclusion to what if Deku had Meliodas' powers or reincarnation or whatever you want to call it. That's been it for me today, guys. If you guys enjoyed today's video at any moment, make sure you guys slap that like button, share with a friend, and leave a comment down below because I will be taking attendance. That said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.